Welcome back to CBS This Morning. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is apologizing to Indigenous Canadians after the remains of more than 200 Indigenous children were found last week. Some were as young as 3. Many from Indigenous communities gathered this week to honor the lives lost. The remains were discovered in Kamloops, British Columbia, at what was once Canada's largest residential school for Indigenous children. Our national correspondent Jericka Duncan spoke with a survivor. Jericka, good morning.
Good morning. This is such a dark chapter of history for Canada that needs to be told. The Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia used to have at least 51 confirmed deaths on its official record. Well, sadly, one survivor told us he was not surprised to find out at least 215 more students were found buried there.
Sometimes kids would not show up in classroom. They would disappear for the next day, and we knew that they were gone, but we didn't know where they were gone.
Gary Gottfriedson is a survivor of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. He's among the thousands of Indigenous peoples legally mandated by the Canadian government to attend such institutions. They were set up in the late 1800s and often operated by the Catholic Church. The last one closed in 1997. University of Alberta professor Crystal Gayle Fraser says abuse was rampant.
The whole point was to erase their Indigenous identities. These Indian residential schools have often been compared to prisons.
We were never allowed to speak our languages in there because of fear of punishment. So those of us that were little were absolutely terrified.
A Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed to investigate abuse at the Indian residential schools. In 2015, it issued a report saying the government committed cultural genocide. At least 4,000 students died at these schools, some of disease, neglect, accidents, or abuse. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Saying sorry for the tragedies of the past is not enough. It's not enough for the children who died, for the families, or for the survivors and communities.
The heinous discovery happened after one of the Canadian First Nations used radar technology on the ground near the school.
Indigenous communities and families have been saying these things for decades, often not notified of deaths. Their children never return home, unable to get any sorts of answers.
In a statement that First Nations chief wrote, the true accounting of the missing students will hopefully bring some peace and closure to those lives lost. As for Gottfriedson, he's still haunted by the memories.
We were made to feel ugly because we were told we were ugly. We were made to feel like we were nothing but dirt. And that has remained with me to this very, very day. It's I've never felt that I was good enough for anything.
The Canadian government has paid more than $1.6 billion to survivors of these schools. That 2015 commission recommended 94 calls to action to help the country address its past treatment of Indigenous children. Indigenous communities are now calling for other school sites to also be searched for remains of school children.
Just that phrase, remains of school children, just a horrific situation. But this Truth and Reconciliation Committee is interesting. It's an idea that has been tried in other countries, not here, though.
Yeah.
Jericka, thank you very much.